Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the new media show. My name is Todd Cochran. Of course, it's been a while since we've been here. Glad to be back in Honolulu. Of course, I want to welcome my co-host, Mr. Rob Greenlee. Rob, good morning. How are you?
Doing fantastic, Todd. It's great to be back. You survived CES for another year. You can put a little notch on your belt, and you made it. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about your CES experience, too, on the show today. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think we can probably get into that in the second half. And, of course,
Yep.
I've got a... Oh, come on, speakers. A live stream play started playing on... But anyway, Rob, go ahead and introduce our guest this morning while I'm being all thumbs.
Well, we're joined by Paul Riismandel, who's actually has been in the radio business for many years, and he's in the podcast business now, and he runs a great site called Radio Survivor at radiosurvivor.com, and he also is a representative of Midroll Media, which is a media company in Los Angeles that focuses on podcasts and sells advertising in there. So we're going to hear more about that too. So welcome to the show, Paul.
Great, thanks. I'm glad to be here.
That's great. It's great to have you on.
Yeah, I wish I were in Hawaii, though.
Yeah, exactly. Well, being in Portland and Seattle, it's this is definitely a rough time of the year, no question about it.
Well,
so, not too bad.
As I tell people, someone has to live here.
Mm-hmm.
Todd raised his hand and said, "It shall be me."
But I'll say this very quietly because my wife is getting the kids up ready to go to a soccer match this morning, and we have soccer year round here in Hawaii, and I've been kind of promoting to her. So why don't we could save a lot of money by moving back to the mainland, and every time I bring this topic up, it's like I make sure the kitchen knives are locked away, and but there is a price of living at paradise, and there is something that's said about being able to get in your vehicle and drive all day and not end up in your driveway.
Yeah, well, there you go, right?
Yeah. So anyway, I digress. But anyway, for the audience, we are really glad to be back, and we've got Rob's working on getting a number of guests lined up for us over the next coming weeks, which should be exciting. And we've got some major announcements today to talk about on the New Media Expo, and specifically the Podcast Awards host. We'll cover that in the second half of the show. We won't give too much away. But I do want to, of course, mention right here off the top, if you're planning on going to Vegas for New Media Expo, you need to get your tickets and get your hotel reservations made and start looking at airline flights. It's just a few short months away, and I think that if you go and hook up with all the podcasters and media creators and bloggers and YouTubers that are going to be at the show, you're going to have a great time. You're going to learn a lot, make a lot of connections. It's an event not to miss. And not only that, you get to experience NAB, which is the National Associated Broadcaster Conference, which is mega large. And it's I think the Las Vegas Convention Center complex is something like 44 football teams, and it will be wall to wall gear from everything from down to the connector to the mega studio that somebody like CNN or Fox would purchase. So it's an absolute fantastic event to go to, and you're going to be well walked, I guess, for better words, after the 4 days of the event. So we encourage you, click on the link at newmediashow.com, and it locks in a discount for you, and make sure you get your tickets as soon as possible.
Well, yeah, and also as we roll into the event here over the next few months, this show is going to be focused on topics that are related to what's going on with the New Media Expo, and so I mean we're a media partner with them, and bringing Rick on occasion. I think I'm going to try and get him on occasion to give us an update on things, and the podcast awards are coming as well, so we have a lot of stuff to talk about on this show. No question, this is a hot time for podcasting, as Paul will expand on for us later.
But just lost Paul there for a second. Skype's acting wonky this morning, isn't it?
Well,
Skype.
Yes. Well, it got an update. I don't know if you noticed. I got, it's a new version. So who knows? Right?
It's the logarithm changed 862. But anyway, so let's get into the content, and it's like it's almost like doing the first show again after we've been off this long. But Paul, I know that there's been a lot of news in the podcasting space recently. Of course, the serial phenomenon last year really upped the volume a lot, which was probably good for all of us. But starting off your new year, there's already been a couple of articles. I guess maybe because this is our first show of the new year, what do you think's going to happen for 2015?
Well, I think that we're going to see a lot more podcasts, but that's the simple story. But I think that you're going to see a lot more players in the space, and that includes both, I think, new startups and new companies coming in, but also including traditional media players. Right after the new year, CBS Radio announced their own podcasting platform called Play It, which includes both their content from their member stations and from their network, as well as some podcasts that joined the network, and they're starting some new shows. And so that's an interesting play coming from a old school traditional radio broadcaster. I know that Discovery Networks recently announced that they're going to start a podcast kind of in the serial vein, I think like a true crime story podcast. And as well, it looks like BuzzFeed has hired someone to work in podcasting. So I think you're going to see players coming from both the new media space, but who haven't really been in podcasting, as well as some traditional broadcasters. Although, I wonder whether we'll see much from anyone besides CBS Radio in terms of traditional broadcasting. But I'll admit that I was even surprised by the CBS announcement.
Yeah,
CBS has been playing around in that area for a while now. Their CBS Sports podcasts are pretty big, and it's something that they've been playing around with for a while. I think that the challenge that CBS Radio has is that a lot of their content is local shows that are in local markets, because primarily that company is CBS Local, which is more of shows in cities, right, that focus on trying to build audience in individual cities, and a lot of the time those shows have a hard time building audience on a national scale, so that's why I think they're looking at adding new shows, is so they can focus on shows that can have a national or global appeal, like normal big podcasts today, because scale is what this game is all about. And I think it's still a little too early for local shows to make it big as podcasts, in kind of like what broadcast radio has today. So I think it's an interesting entry, getting CBS in there. There's not a lot of other, Paul, I 100% agree. I don't know that there's a lot of other big radio players that are going to jump in quite like those guys did. I agree.
One thing that I bring the website up here for the audience to see is that I find it interesting that I'm looking at the top of their website, and it's www.playit/audio. I haven't quite figured out what the story with that is. Either having DNS troubles, or maybe they're growing so fast they had to move servers. I don't know, but and just looking at the website, they did a nice design. They bought a great domain, and I don't know what their acquisition plan is for podcasters. I'm sure they're bringing them in from affiliates at the beginning. I don't think anyone else. I don't think just any average indie podcaster is being at least featured on the site at this point. But
no, they took on a few independent podcasts. I saw one. There's like an entrepreneur business one that was independent. They signed on. I don't think it's an owned and operated situation. I think it's more of probably like a revenue sharing kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking through the list here. Society, culture, sports, of course, business and tech. There's some podcasts here. I'm quite honest with you, I've never heard of before. So
me too.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of them are because they're shows in local markets. You wouldn't know about them, and that's the challenge that they have, and it takes us back to that earlier conversation, Todd, that we've had, is about scale.
Yeah.
Right? Podcasts need to get more like radio on the scale side before local shows can do well in podcasting.
One thing I didn't notice when I had the first link up, but they then
Jim Rome
listed
is
all
a
this.
big one.
They have all the stations listed. So I don't know if each. Let's click on one of these and see if we go over to the specific website. Yeah, it does. It loads 101. It loads it on their website, but there's only one podcast at that specific station.
And like the
so.
Scott Shannon show, I think is syndicated. So
Oh.
I don't think that, and I'm not sure how much. I think it is music, if I'm not incorrect. So I don't know how they podcast it, but
Well, it's encouraging. I like to see in the space. I don't, I think it's good. It helps for growth and for advertisers to definitely be looking at the space more. So which that's always a good thing when there's more news. What do Rob? You said you didn't think that there were going to be many more radio groups per se jumping in at this point. You're not hearing anything in the grapevine, or
Well, as you think about it, I mean, there's only a few of them anyway, and most of them are similar to CBS Radio, that they focus on local market content, news, sports, weather, some music stations and things like that. And those things are not as conducive for national level podcasting to build audiences. So, some of those players, I don't know. There may be a few more guys that jump into it. It's going to be interesting to see. I think that there's a lot of kind of pressure right now for a lot of audio producers to get in the game. So it's going to be interesting to see how widespread that is. And Paul, I mean, what's your thought on all that?
The thing with commercial radio is they, generally speaking, don't invest in talent any longer. And, on the local level, you're principally talking about music stations. If you talk about, the vast majority of the stations owned by a big owner, whether it's like a Cumulus or an Intercom. And so, I mean, that doesn't translate so well to podcasting because they aren't really shows. Maybe there's a morning drive in the bigger markets, and they might have enough produced content, whether it's produced gags or really good repartee with good hosts, that it adapts well to podcasting, in the same way that someone like Adam Carolla has adapted very well to podcasting. But, for the more music-intensive shows, you can't podcast that really.
Yeah.
And especially because you get outside of drive time, these stations, they're automated. And it's voice tracking, so they're not really shows in the same way that a podcast is. And that's really why I think the big players are going to have a hard time, because that would mean they actually have to go invest in talent. And they do a little bit on the AM side, on the talk side. But their audience is old and aging, and not necessarily a great audience for podcasting.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that we saw last year, and big part of our business growth last year was signing. We probably signed 20, independent. They were like maybe 10 or 15 stations, small groups that had maybe 4 or 5 podcasts each, or maybe 10, maybe at the max. I think maybe the biggest was like 18 or something like that. But so we're going back to those groups now because they've just been running media statistics up to this point. We're going back to those groups saying, okay, it's been a year. Are you ready to do portals and all that stuff that goes along with maybe building the brand bigger and not necessarily having it so radio focused? And in initial few emails that and meetings we've had, it's been pretty positive. They're kind of, I think what they're seeing, and maybe it's been forced on them by what's happening in the news, is they're saying, okay, we need to up the game a little bit. But again, these are small independent networks, are not the Clear Channels of the world.
Yeah, that's where I would hope we would see some innovation and some new approaches. And, maybe the groups where they have a little more flexibility to experiment, although that doesn't happen too much in commercial radio. But, maybe to experiment and try new things, even because, you only need to have an hour or 2 hour program, weekly, really, to experiment with, which, comparatively speaking, is a small amount of your broadcast week. And if you can turn that into a podcast hit in the same way that public radio has been able to do so time and time again, maybe there's some hope. And I think it might come from, again, those smaller groups that own, 5, 10, 15 stations rather than 600, 700.
Mm-hmm. I mean, clearly, I agree, Paul. They could actually do it. It's just, do they have the will, like you said, to invest in talent and creating a national show when they're so local focused?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's And then they also have to think about the business side too. I mean, how are they going to sell those shows, right? Do they have the sales staff or team to sell a national show when most of those groups have been so focused on selling local ads?
And also too, the programming is broke up into different chunks, and it's like, okay, we're right back, and it's like they've got 5 of those segments an hour, so it's they have to work to clean up the audio. So sometimes it's more pain than it's worth. So sometimes we hear at least in my sampling, I heard the local ads on their national iTunes syndication, which was
Oh yeah,
come
that sounds
down
good.
come
Yeah.
down to Charlie's auto shop or something. It's
Yeah, exactly.
No, it will require time and investment.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it. Maybe not as much as we think, but that really is what radio needs to do anyway, is to begin investing again in their talent and in their programming, because it really, all the money was sucked out of that end of the business, with the exception for a few big stars. And so whether it's drive time or on the AM side, someone like Rush Limbaugh. For what they pay Rush Limbaugh, they could put a lot of really talented people to work at the local affiliates.
Yeah, I've also heard that the Clear Channel folks, or now iHeartRadio, those folks are going through some pretty significant financial problems right now. So there's been a bunch of layoffs, and there's a rumor flying around that they're going to go into bankruptcy.
Whoa.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Yeah.
The iHeartRadio is?
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah, because they're owned by private equity right now, and that was essentially because their stock was tanking prior to that takeover.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, it's baffling to me that could fail. I guess maybe, they have promoted the living daylights out of that app, and every terrestrial radio station that's on Clear, you hear them promoting iHeartRadio. So obviously it hasn't had the take up then that they expected it to.
Yeah, and I think
they just have
they've
a lot of
invested
debt.
a lot in in live events and music events, and really went big with it. I guess hoping that they could build a huge brand, and I think they did build a big brand, and they did embrace podcasting for which they still do, but it feels like it was kind of a half-hearted effort. They did a deal with Spreaker to get a bunch of content in there, and then that deal ended about a year ago or so. So I'm not really sure how important podcasting is to those guys.
Well, they're just carrying massive loads of debt. I mean, so they're still carrying debt from acquiring those hundreds and hundreds of stations. I mean, that was their business model.
Yeah.
After the Telecommunications Act of 1996 loosened up the regulations on how many stations you could own, they hoovered up stations, in markets, combined them together, got rid of staff, got rid of talent, put in voice tracking.
Right.
And so that took a lot of capital. But at the time, they realized some short-term profits because they drove down their operating costs. And then after that was all done, they still had debt. And in the process of driving down their operating costs, they also drove down the amount that they could sell ads for, drove down the cost of ads in the markets they operated, and their profits went down. I mean, it's very simple economics that happened, and they're still suffering under that debt today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think too, obviously with the IIB and what's going on there, and you're working to get some documents out this year. It's the space obviously is getting some attention it deserves. So I'm excited with that whole process in itself. It's kind of slow going when you have 30 people working on a document, but that's just the nature of the beast. But I think it'll help the space overall, not only from a exposure standpoint, but also from a monetization standpoint. As as the IB starts putting some of this information out, it's going to help the media buyers having a little more, I guess, better for a better word, some working guidelines, which will be good to have kind of the industry as a whole on the same page. And I think we're pretty much all on the same page already, but maybe it'll just clarify it a little more. I don't know. Paul, have you been involved at all in any of those calls?
I haven't been involved in the IAB stuff, no.
Yeah, and it's an interesting process. They're working on a document just for the audience that aren't familiar with the Interactive Advertising Bureau. IAB.net is formed a podcast committee, and the what's going on right now is a development of a document that's a state of the space, some case studies on some advertising campaigns, demographic data, some definitions of the media and delivery and measurement. No standards per se yet. That'll come later. But it's more of kind of an overarching, state of the state. This is where we think the space is at. So, a lot of heavy hitters in the space. Midroll's in this. We are Podtrack, Libsyn, Podcast One, AdWiz, a variety of a couple of other injection companies. Triton, I think, is on. So it's and CBS, NPR,
Wide Orbit's on it.
Yeah, Wide Orbit. So it's all the major players are there. And as I stated in a recent article that I published, I basically said, we're going to do our best to keep the podcast community as a whole informed because, the companies are there, but the podcasters per se are not due to the cost of entry of joining the IAB. But I think at least the majority of the companies have the podcasters' well-being in mind. I don't see anything nefarious going on that's going to piss people off yet. So, and if I do, you guys know I'm not one to be quiet. So,
well, and I think, Todd, that's an important role that I think this show can play is maybe to shed some light on what's happening there over time to help people see what's happening too. I know we've both been through this a little bit this process with the Association of Downloadable Media and how lack of transparency on that created quite a stir in the community.
Mm-hmm.
So I think as this group kind of works together, and I'm on that call as well, kind of works through, hopefully we can establish, some common set of definitions, like I said, terms that are commonly used in the advertising business and the podcast business. There's been a lot of kind of confusion around that for a long time. And pulling that together, and then also things like, market size, how many podcasts, what's the total advertising size, right? If we can get all the companies that are involved in this space to report into an independent kind of, like a CPA firm or something like that can cull together sales figures, and I think a lot of the companies in the space are probably more than willing to do that if it's an independent party that can just collate those numbers. That isn't part of the podcast industry.
And some CPA that is not going to share
numbers.
Data, and it just makes it transparent. And IAB has basically done that with the other groups already. So I think that's a step in the right direction. We'll find out more about that in the next meeting. But one thing that is encouraging to me, and it's because something that's very close and dear to my heart, is the geeks are going to get together at NAB. And the geeks, per se, the measurement leads at each of the groups, and they're going to go in and lock themselves in a room, and hopefully they don't come out with black eyes, but they will. I think once you get the geeks together and they all can kind of talk shop, I think what we'll kind of find out as they come out of that is the majority of the folks are probably using some of the same exact filtering and standards and all the stuff that goes into coming up with the number, per se, that we bill media buyers for campaigns, because I'll be honest with you, if we don't, I know media buyers that are already signed with us, and they're actually using they've white labeled our solution, and they're making podcasters that go on their podcast buys to use that white label. So if we don't do it, the media buyers are going to, and it probably won't sit well with some podcaster when they're told they're going to have to use a different measurement system, and it causes a rift. So that's not necessarily good, but the media buyers are getting wise fast, I guess, for a better word.
Well, and Todd, there's still podcast hosts platforms that are not a part of this committee, too.
Right.
So, So I think that there's a hole out there that needs to be filled somehow.
Yeah.
Like Podbean and I'm sure there's others out there that are just not involved in the community at all.
Well, they have a service sign, but we don't know who any of the players are. No one's ever knew.
Yeah. So there are holes in this space that have been there forever and have really held back the space too. It's like we don't even know what the size of how many podcasts there are. iTunes throws a number out, but it's always this vague, generalized number that never really changes much. And getting Apple more involved too is another important thing. And as we've talked about many times too, getting other players, other big players in the technology sector involved in this too. Like a Google and getting people like Microsoft kind of back on board too is something that needs to happen as well.
And Paul, I'm going to ask you a question on Android. I made 2015 the year of the Android for podcasting. I am really like hardcore dedicated trying to get the Android space on board, and maybe it's going to be a exercise in futility. I don't know, but why do you feel the Android space is so far out of whack as far as being consuming, subscribing, the whole 9 yards? Is it because there's not a one-click subscription method, or is it just like we're in a no man's land because Google's not supporting the space?
Yeah, I think it's really the latter. Apple's support for podcasting can't really be overlooked with regard to how into both the promotion of the medium and the fact that it now is so dominated by iOS in a lot of ways. If there were, the Google Play Store for podcasting, I think we'd see a change. I think it's as simple as that. If on top of that, there were a podcast app that came pre-installed with Android, we would see a change there. Because Android's a very different kind of ecosystem, I think if there were a single carrier or a single manufacturer who started to support podcasting, be it someone like Samsung or LG, then I think we'd also see, some more uptake in Android. But it's because it's, still up to these individual app developers, and many of them are great, right, and have done a lot to help support Android, but because it's up to them, there just isn't that same kind of unity of voice. It makes podcasting on Android look more like, things looked 5-6 years ago as opposed to 2015.
Yeah, I think what really needs to happen is podcasts need to be added to the Play Store. And there needs to be an app, a first-party app out of Google that's available that kind of works with that. And I think that would make a huge difference. But yeah, I think a lot of the third-party developers, like Stitcher is pretty big on Android, but they're like 3% or something like that.
I think their combined is like 7, and it's almost split down the middle between iOS and Android.
Yeah, it's pretty close. But yeah, I think it's just a huge opportunity, and I'm trying to do everything I can.
If you think about the perspective on potential audience growth, I literally, because I spend a lot of time working with individual podcasters, I literally look at hundreds of sites a week, and it's almost the first thing I look for when I go onto a site is, okay, what are you doing to help your Android listeners? And they don't. It's just so evident across the board, and it just, my aggravation level, I kind of can become numb to it at this point, but it's like they completely, some shows do a good job, but the majority of shows just do not even try. And it's really too bad, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Is there, as Paul said, there's a lot of great apps.
There's not a lot of great instruction.
Right.
As minimal as it is, iTunes, it's a pretty unified set of instructions you can find for submitting and for, finding your iTunes store link and things like that. If I want to make my site and my podcast more Android friendly, where do I look?
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And
there's no unified.
And we tried to help this out with basically making it easy for podcasters to make a subscribe page with PowerPress. But the challenge that we've run into still then is, okay, you got to talk about it on your show, and you got to tell your audience who is an iOS user, tell their Android friends. about the podcast, and then get them to the 2 or 3 steps they have to go through. It's just so easy to just click and you're done with iOS, and it's definitely what's missing.
And I think it's going to be really important as Android enters the connected dashboard, right? So as we start now seeing more Android native dashboards, having that podcast app and easy podcast connectivity is going to be really important, because the new frontier for podcasting and the current frontier for podcasting is really the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's the big revolution that's coming. It hasn't fully hit yet, Paul, but I 100% agree. I think a lot of the stuff, and Todd, maybe you saw stuff down at CES around car infotainment.
Yeah, I did, and it's not going to be easy from if you're on the side of trying to get deployment. If you're Pandora, what's already in, you've kind of are the early lead on that. You're not going to have much problem. Maybe Stitch or two, but I think what ultimately is going to happen is, I got a good look at Sync 3 that Ford is coming out with, and they've completely revamped that platform, and the API is well set, and the SDK stuff that for devs to come in and write, but you still have to go through Ford's process to be approved, and the development and probably the legal and the level of stuff you're going to have to do to get into an app onto a dashboard is going to be it's going to be expensive. It's not going to be something that's you're going to throw an app together like on the Roku, and 2 weeks later you're on the channel list. But I think ultimately everyone still has a phone in their pocket, and I think for a long time this is still going to be in my car. I got 2 kids that tuned in to do 2 different things. My wife's looking at a tablet, and I've got this connected via Bluetooth. So those folks that are in cars by themselves commuting, that may be a different story. Maybe they will use their dashboard, but it goes back again to, okay, are people going to be willing to pay $35 a month for another connected, another connectivity fee for the car? Probably. As much time as I spend in my vehicle, I know I would, but at the same time, I think the mobile device is going to bridge a gap in the meantime as these solutions come online.
Well, Todd, I mean, more and more the wireless carriers are making it really easy and inexpensive to add a device, right. to your data plan. And I believe that what's going to happen with a lot of those car manufacturers, that they're going to use that as a sales tool, as an incentive to sell cars. They're going to say, well, if you buy this Mercedes, you're going to get 2 years of free data from AT&T or something like that,
right.
or you're going to be able to add it for free to your data plan, or I'm sure that they're going to do some sort of incentives to get people to get in there. But I've seen some research that Microsoft did around the auto car, and the in-car dash experience with apps is going to be a transformational thing. It's just going to be so much easier for people, and people are going to use AM/FM less because of it. And I think it's just going to drive a lot of scale. I think over the next 5 years, I think on-demand audio is going to start really replacing AM/FM radio. Yeah,
when it can be their AM/FM or serial, right? That's really a turning point. And in the same way that for satellite radio, when it became AM/FM or Sirius, especially in new cars or in rental cars, which I think is often overlooked as a big gateway and a big way to hook people.
Yep.
If we see more connected cars and connected apps in rental cars, if you could have a podcast app in a rental car, and someone gets hooked on that over the course of a 3 or 4 day vacation or trip, much more likely to go home and say, wow, either can I add a new third-party stereo, or next time I'm in the market for a car, that goes higher on my list. Just the problem with cars is, people replace them, every 5, 7, 10 years. They're not smartphones.
The third-party market has got some great stuff, but the challenge I think that the third-party market's having is usually the folks that update the radio in the vehicle are 25 and under. Most people that are out in the workplace that are probably in the later age group, they buy nice enough vehicle that the the entertainment system on it's pretty complete, and they don't do that third-party upgrade. And I don't think the 18 to 25 crowd is listening to podcasts right now. But
well, that's our challenge, isn't it, to get them listening?
It is. It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and if they're going to do it, it's going to be on their phones. But yeah.
Yeah.
I just got saved coffee. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit, Paul, about some of the stuff that you're involved in. And, obviously, we'll talk about mid-roll here in a minute, but let's talk about Radio Survivor first and what's going on there.
Sure. So this is a website I've been working on for 5 years with two great colleagues of mine, Matthew Lassar, who teaches history and radio studies at University of California, Santa Cruz, and Jennifer Waite, who is a radio historian. And we try to cover the side of radio that doesn't really get covered by the industry publications. I mean, there are great industry publications out there, whether you're talking about All Access or Radio World, but it's really written by the industry for the industry. And, in a way, we'd love to be sort of Entertainment Weekly for radio, although not quite. But really, we aim at people who are radio enthusiasts, whether they are only listeners, maybe they actually are producers, maybe they work in community radio or college radio or public radio, or maybe they do work at a local commercial station, but they're not always interested in just whatever the top records are or certain engineering issues. So that's kind of how we try to tackle radio, and we look at radio broadly. Radio is podcasting, radio is internet radio, radio is satellite radio, along with AM and FM broadcast and shortwave even. And really just try to dig in and provide this sort of information service to all these people who love radio. I mean, in a way, if you're way into movies, right, there's sites out there for you that give movie reviews, but also talk about the industry and talk about new releases or talk about how it all works for people who aren't necessarily industry or just very interested, and we love to do that for radio.
And if I remember correctly, you guys have had some pretty good success with that show too, right?
We don't have a show yet.
Oh, you don't? I thought you did.
I used to have a show. I did a podcast and radio show for about 7 years called Media Geek from about 2002 to 2009. And I quit in 2009, which meant I was just in time to not take advantage of the grand upswing in interest in podcasting. It was a show I did on a community station and then syndicated online before the word podcasting existed.
Right.
And so I had about 12, 13, 14 different affiliates around North America. And then when RSS enclosures came out, it turned it into a podcast. And since it was non-commercial, it was pretty easy to do. And I did that. It was a little different. I covered a little bit more media policy than we do all the time on Radio Survivor. But I had some success with it. And then because I was doing it on the side and it wasn't my main gig, I just simply got burned out.
Yeah, and it happens a lot. When you're trying to do 5 different things, and sometimes the hobby passion takes the hit.
Yeah.
So, and of course, let's talk about mid-roll too, because mid-roll came on the scene hot and heavy last year, and you guys have been tearing it up ever since. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on at mid-roll, and basically for the folks that don't know what mid-roll is, tell them about mid-roll.
Sure. So Midroll Media is a company which has a few kind of divisions. So Midroll is our ad sales division. We represent podcasters to advertisers, so we're essentially an advertising agency. Our goal is to help podcasters make money. And that's the area in which I work the most as our podcasting evangelist and content marketer. But Midroll owns 2 podcasting networks as well. Earwolf, which has shows like Comedy Bang Bang, How This Get Made, Who Charted, and our newest network, Wolf Pop, which debuted this past November, which debuted with 13 shows all at once. And so we've got some great shows there, such as The Canon, which is a new movie review show. We have Leonard Maltin's new podcast. His book has seen its last edition, so he started a podcast. You can see there Reading Aloud with actor Nate Cordry, which is all about the spoken word, all about literature and reading. So we represent, of course, these O&O, these owned and operated podcasts, but then we've got well over 100 or 130 podcasts, which we also represent to advertisers. And the company's origins are in Earwolf, in the first podcasts, Comedy Bang Bang and Scarborough Country, which are the inaugural podcasts. And it was really because our founder, Jeff Ulrich, started selling advertising for those shows and got pretty good at it, and saw that there was a bigger business there, is how the company evolved.
Yes.
And we've had Jeff on this show before, so if you go back and look in our archives, you can hear Jeff tell about that story.
Yeah. It's interesting, too. I find the genesis of many of the companies are the same. Because it's almost like, I wasn't doing ad sales in 2005. I was doing a podcast, and then, someone said, "Hey, you know anyone else that wants to do advertising?" It is interesting that how you go from having a property, having a show, and then the next thing you're building networks and doing ad deals. It's a great story for the space. You don't see that happen very often in other spaces, and especially in the media space. It's so hard to break out and to break into. So, we're still having our own, the entire space is having break-in issues at this point still, but it's getting a lot better for sure.
Yeah, and I think that there are patterns from the past that how networks start are very similar. If you look at the commonalities across the successful networks, there's usually like maybe a lead show. If you think of like the Nerdist as a good example, you have Chris Hardwick's Nerdist show. That's like the anchor show for the network, and then those people just build on top of that, or Twit, with This Week in Tech with Leo. There's just foundational things that, unless you go back and look at what's worked in the past in this space, I think you can learn from it that will help new people coming into the space make better decisions going forward about what works and what doesn't, based on what's been done and what's been successful.
Well, I tell you, I found a few things that didn't work in the past, Rob.
Well, those are things that you should avoid, right?
Yeah, and I hope people did. And if they didn't, they're not necessarily painful, but they're like, oh, that was dumb.
So Todd, what are a couple of those you just kind of throw out?
One is, if you're going to start a network, don't do it as a co-op.
Don't do it as a co-op, yeah.
That is dumb. That was really, really dumb, because there's always going to be one person doing all the work, and the rest of the people are like, okay, we'll reap the rewards.
Yeah,
That was probably the biggest eye-opener for me. You mean you all don't want to work together and succeed? And no, that was probably the biggest one in building a network. I don't know. I think, two, is we had some ideas that were way early. And actually some stuff that we did way early I'm going back to now, and I says, is this, something we did 8 years ago? Is it actually time now? Is our idea actually caught up, or is the space caught up to the idea where people are not going to go, what is that? So, some of those early ideas we had were just way, way, way too early on this, basically on the execution scale. But
yeah, I think
it's little things like that.
Yeah, I think that the Tech Podcast Network was probably one of the.
It was the first,
the earliest, right?
Yeah.
And it's still around. I mean, I think there were a few that launched. Podango was one, I think, back in that time frame. There's a couple others that aren't around anymore, but I think the Tech Podcast Network is probably the only one around. It's the oldest, and maybe the first. I'm not sure.
It's 140 shows that reach 23 million uniques a month. So it's doing pretty good still, even today.
I think it goes to show that persistence is important, and this is true in the podcasting space. It's true in a lot of other businesses, and that one concern is that people seeing the success of a serial or startup podcast, which debuted last year to great acclaim, and they won't necessarily have the patience to stick with it, right, to build audience the old-fashioned way, right, which is produce a great show, make sure people know about it, and work hard on all those things, and put it out there consistently. Get it out there. Don't make people wait for it. Don't make people, wonder when they're going to see the next episode. and do the legwork. And because that's how Earwolf was built, for instance, is really in that level of persistence and making sure they're always putting out a great product, putting it out on time, and with great consistency, and doing all that legwork and making sure people know about it and not letting up. And I think that is a lesson that bears repeating time and time again. And that's how you build shows, and that's how you build a network. And the great thing about a network is that when you add a new show, right, you have a little bit more opportunity to expose more people to it. You build a brand.
Yep.
You can cross promote across your shows and get a little boost that way. You often can cross promote with talent and have one of your bigger talents come on to one of your new shows. And it gives the new shows a little bit more of a boost, because you're just building on something that you already have, that you've already put a lot of effort into, but it's probably not going to happen in a year for most people.
Yeah.
One thing that I've see right now in the space, and I've talked a little bit too much about it, is there's this everyone is looking for shortcuts, and there's really no shortcut. When I was in the military, we had this saying that was basically sustained superior performance gets you promoted, and that was kind of this mantra that I heard for my 24 years of being active duty. And then again in the podcasting space, I tell people now, sustain superior content builds audiences, and you have to. And Paul, you're exactly right. You have to work at it, and but we still see, even from the very early days, that people have these false expectations, and they get into the space, and we're still seeing failure rates. Even today, 50% of shows that start don't make it to episode 7. What's remaining of those shows, about a little under 50% of those don't make it to 23 or 24, and then if they make it past 2 years, they're doing pretty good. But I guess kind of the litmus test for me is, okay, has the guy been around 2 years? Okay, well, he's done the legwork. Now let's look. Now, obviously, you can launch shows with a network, like you said, but most of the folks out there are just, we live in this give it to me now world, and it's not healthy for the space.
I don't know sure it's ever been different in any other medium.
Yeah.
And if you look at the number of major motion pictures released a year, and then look at how many are profitable, or how many are blockbusters, or how many magazines get launched still and fold, so you might even say that there's a good side to this, in that, one of the wonderful things about podcasting is that it does, talent and a microphone, some decent production, right? The barrier to entry is relatively low. And so it's great that there is this opportunity for so many new voices, so many new approaches, new talent. And there is this opportunity for innovation, because the innovation is comparatively inexpensive compared to innovating in major motion pictures.
Right.
Right. So that's great. But, when you have so many people coming in, it's inevitable that, there's always going to be this sort of sorting out process. And that sorting out process has a lot of factors, right? Whether it's just a show that didn't work, or wasn't very good, or it wasn't good fast enough for the person doing it, didn't get the audience, all sorts of factors intervene. The same way I quit my show in 2009, because I burned out, and not because I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere with it, but just I ran out of time. And a lot of times I regret that, because I feel like, wow, if I was still doing it today, it's just a different landscape. But there's a real positive, I think, to all these people coming in, and maybe over time we'll see fewer of them fail. Or there's more and more resources out there to help people. There's more good coaches, good information, and I think also networks and good agencies that also want to lend a hand and give that little extra boost, and to give a little extra advice to the shows that show promise.
One thing that we learned, and this is going back to some of the stuff that I've done at CES. And first year I went to CES, it was Andy McCaskey and I with an audio recorder, and we went to meet vendors and cover the show and get extra content for our audience. We quickly realized from that event that this is where we needed to be every year in a bigger way. It really sets up the content that you have throughout the year and the connections that you make, and it's obviously you're dealing with the PR people and the whole 9 yards. But we took that from a small idea to having a bunch of shows work together that were part of the network, and we didn't get big numbers those first 2, 3, 4, 5 years, but what ended up happening because we were being consistent and we were working at it. We had a couple of opportunities with NBC Universal when they were there doing live broadcasts, doing some stuff on their stage. We absolutely smoked the live stream numbers. We were beating NBC Universal's live numbers like double. We were over double what they were getting. And then you got these execs that are sitting there scratching their head. Like, how did they just bring 45,000 people on the stream and we could only get 21,000? And this was before Twitter. And I think what we have found is, as working as a group together, is that you can do incredible things as a team. But what I also see as a negative is podcasters are largely alpha, independent, don't want a lot of advice, or if they do, it is interesting because people that create media are definitely different personalities. But
yeah.
But
well, they're kind of like stray cats, right?
Right.
Everybody trying to bring them together is a challenge. Yeah.
But when I look at the numbers and we got the circulation numbers from the folks that we worked with, the live blog and live stream and everyone else, we had incredible engagement minutes this year. Like on Thursday, actually our top day was Wednesday with 2,831,000 engagement minutes across the 8 hours of content. Now, it may not sound like a lot. You do the math on that, divide it, by 60 minutes by the number of 8 hours and so forth. But we're looking at CNET numbers, and we're competing with CNET. So when independent content people can compete with the big boys, which in my space would be CNET and Verge, it shows you can do it, and it's just you just have to work at it.
Yeah, I mean, look at Night Vale.
Yeah,
a breakout podcast. Not coming in with any network affiliation, really no help, and really on the merit of their content, busting out. And yet, you can also see the advantage of working together,
right.
Whether it's the example you provide or say Public Radio Exchange's Radiotopia,
yep.
which is, sort of explicitly put together to help, create and curate and also promote new public radio style podcasting content, but very specifically podcasting. And so, they're bringing together both experienced producers like Roman Mars and the Kitchen Sisters and teaming them up with new rising talent, right? And doing great, and also had an amazing Kickstarter to add more shows and to help people make new seasons. And that's because they're working together. They're exchanging talent, they're exchanging training, and they're also working together to find out, what are some new best practices for creating new kinds of content. And I think it's a very fruitful model already.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about Serial, and I think a lot of people need to keep this in mind as they think about that success, right? Serial was great for the podcast space. I mean, it created a lot of media coverage, and it's still creating articles out there, them talking about the post-Serial era now. And it's it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic, but I think if you back up and you look at what Serial was built on a solid foundation. From the team of This American Life, the Glass team, if you want to call it. But it was really a lot of those programs, and Paul, you can expand on this too, have a team, right? It's not like one podcaster sitting at a mic that's doing a show. They actually have producers. They have editors. They have people that can do terrific content because they have great skills. They understand how to tell stories. I mean, it gets back to what we've been saying all along. It's about talent and the ability to produce quality content. And I think there's a spectrum of that, right? There's shows like this one that are not heavily scripted or heavily produced or anything like that, where we just get in and talk. And then there's shows like Serial, right? Or We're Alive or Night Vale or whatever that are highly scripted, audio dramas, all that kind of stuff. So there's this spectrum and people are really gravitate towards storytelling. It's been on TV, 2020 and all these things. I mean, a lot of what Serial was a reflection of what's been popular on television for decades, and it just, I guess, it's a new medium. People like to experience those same kinds of things. So I think that there's some lessons to be learned from what happened with Serial, but the roots of podcasting are more like what this show's about.
Well, I mean, Serial, was an investment, right? That was an investment by the This American Life team in terms of money and production time, staff time. And it was a great success, but it might have been just a little successful. The thing about what makes it special and what makes it, part of podcasting to me is that the storytelling approach was still different. It was different than what you're going to find on like a Dateline. It's different than what you're going to find on PBS in Frontline. There was an intimacy to the storytelling, especially, Sarah Koenig's approach that really is in that podcasting vein and was also innovative because it was applying it to this true crime, true life story. And, you can produce a season of Serial for less than you can produce one episode of primetime television.
Yeah, that's true.
So even if it was a really significant investment by This American Life on the podcast scale, but on the television scale, it was a tiny, tiny amount of money. And so it just goes to show how an investment in podcasting can really, really pay off, and it helps to have talent, at Earwolf and at Wolf Pop, we have studios, we have engineers who are there. So we have our great talent who can come in and they're responsible for their shows. But they don't have to know how to run a mixing board or how to edit and do a lot of these other things. We take care of all that back end stuff and making sure it comes out really well on, as the show. And the talent can focus on doing what they do best, which is frequently being funny, being witty, getting good guests, being smart on mic, that stuff. We take care of the rest of that. And that's a pretty good formula because it scales well, because you can bring more people into the studio. If you already have engineers, you already have a place for them to do it, right?
Yep.
Do you think that Serial made a mistake by not basically having another show ready to go?
I've been thinking about that too.
It really blows my mind. They got this groundswell. They're moving forward. Okay, so take a 2-week break, but have the next series ready to announce, promote. Obviously they're going to be able to pick up where they left off because they've got the good press love. That's going to help them a lot. But from a guy that's doing 2 shows a week and has been doing 2 shows a week for 10 years, by the way, 1,004 episodes, Rob. We finally got over that
Wow.
3-digit number. It is a puzzling to me, and maybe they can afford to, or maybe they couldn't afford to have another series start right away. I don't know, but to me, it seemed like, boom, we should have been right into the next get-go and rolling. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the strategy of having seasons like TV does.
Well, I mean, I do think that there probably was a real practical reason, that you just mentioned, is that they probably had enough money to create this season, and they weren't even sure that they're going to do a second one, right?
Oh.
That's my guess, and it really was going to be depend upon how well it did. And one of the advantages of having seasons can be that anticipation, right? You might write it too long and people stop caring, right? But if you talk about like a shorter television series like Mad Men or Breaking Bad, which didn't have these long 26 episode seasons, they built anticipation for the next season, right? People were waiting and would have viewing parties. They're really excited for it to start in a way that they might not be so excited for a new season of 2.5 Men, right? Not because it's not a good show, just because it doesn't have the same kind of narrative quality. There aren't stories to be resolved. We're not really worried about what happens next. So for probably a show like Serial, doing it that way isn't such a bad idea, and it probably will work out for them. For other shows that are more newsy, that are more up to date, it's harder to justify. although look like a show like 99% Invisible with Roman Mars, right? I mean, he runs in seasons, and he's kickstarted each new season, and each Kickstarter has been better and better and better. So if you're working more with the crowdfunding or that public radio model, where you're relying a lot on listener donors, the idea that you need their help to make another season or to come back might work in your favor.
That's right.
But it might not work as well if you're strictly advertising funded.
I think where Todd was talking about, it's kind of the foundational aspect of podcasting, where you have momentum and you have loyal listeners that stick with you over the long term.
Yeah.
And there is statistical evidence that people unsubscribe if there's not new content. So I think they're looking at it from their interests, right, as opposed to maybe the interests of the audience, right? And I think that's their choice to do it that way. Like Todd said also, and I tend to agree, I'm not a big fan of the whole seasons concept. The only other reason that hasn't been mentioned that they might want to do that too is maybe they want to turn it into a audiobook series that they actually sell. As you look into the future, right? And then they can work on like a new story at some point that they can launch and create another kind of bubble of following, right? And then do that again. It's maybe a little bit of a monetization strategy as well, potentially. But I tend to go a little old school on this and think that you want to keep a series going like that and build it and make it bigger and bigger and bigger, not just kill it.
But Rob, I have to give Paul credit. Is my show? I have to be twice a week. It's fresh news. I'm telling a story about current events, not about something. I don't have this big theatrical procedure that we go through. It's like look over the news and hit record. So
and I saw this same thing happen with the We're Alive series. That launched in 2009. It was really the kind of earliest play in this area. Part of the whole Night Vale thing. The whole radio drama thing, and the creator of that show has been on this show as well. He found that he produced. He was thinking of that series concept as well. But what he found is that he would create like his first 20 episodes or whatever. But he would find that his audience was just pestering the hell out of him to keep doing it because they loved it. Right? I'm sure that's what's happening with Serial. They're getting audience people saying, we want more, we want more, we want more. And, it's up to them. How do they respond to that? And the We're Alive guy decided that he was going to keep making new episodes. And I think he wound up doing it for close to 3 or 4 years straight through. When I think he only had intention of doing it for like maybe 20 or 30 episodes.
Right. I mean, a show like that it's just more expensive, whether in terms of money or time to produce.
Yeah. That's right.
There's much more pre-production, right?
Yep.
As opposed to a live, talk show.
Yep.
And which is simply why television isn't a series model as well, because they have the on and off season when they're in production and when they're out of production.
Yes.
It'll be interesting to see how this develops. It'll be interesting to see when Serial comes back, if they retain audience or they grow audience, and maybe there's there could be all sorts of interesting ways to attack that hiatus. Imagine if Serial had their own sort of meta serial show in the in between, right? So Slate and the Onion AV Club made them, but AMC does that, right? They have The Walking Dead and The Talking Dead. So imagine if the interim series were Talking Serial or something, where they had someone besides Sarah Koenig doing this deep dive analysis, right? Who weren't part of the production team, but it could keep people hooked and listening and tuned in.
Well, actually, that did happen with the Serial. There was probably a half dozen or more spin-off, shows that were being done about Serial.
Serial should just do that themselves.
And I have to say I applaud those folks that do that, because it takes a lot of dedication to be able to deep dive someone else's show. It is an interesting. But there have been a lot of successful shows that have done that. TV shows, Lost, the number of Lost shows that really exploded. But Anyway, well, Paul, we're at the top of the hour. I wanted to, give you a chance. Anything top of mind that you'd like to see happen this year, or do you have concerns in the space, or what's your message going forward into 2015?
Well, I mean, I'm super optimistic. I'm really, really excited to see what happens this year. In particular, a couple things I'm watching is I want to see what happens with Deezer and Stitcher. That Stitcher was acquired by Deezer, which is the global #2 music streaming service behind Spotify. Deezer's just starting to inch into the U.S., so I'm very curious to see what happens with that combination. Also, Apple bought Swell, that podcast app, last year. Curious to see how that's going to influence the native iOS podcast app or CarPlay and things like that. So we've got some really interesting potential happenings on the horizon there in platforms. And platforms are important because they are really a way in which help get people into the medium and start listening. So those are two things I know nothing about what's happening, but I'm really anxious to find out more. Otherwise, I think what we're looking for is lots of new shows, and I'm hoping for, and I'm excited for seeing what some new breakout independents. What is the next Night Vale? What is the next show from somebody we didn't see coming? We never heard of before. That's, to me, always the exciting part about podcasting is that potential. And so I'm certainly looking forward to something like that happening as well. But, I want to, that doesn't mean I don't want to see growth from a lot of the existing players, including the company I work for, including Earwolf and Wolf Pop and Mineral Media and all the other players, and seeing what kind of great new shows and innovation, new talent can be brought in. This is a real great moment to seize, and I think that we're going to see a lot of people seizing it.
Yeah, I know from our services business, numbers are way up. There's a lot of new shows, and I think the initiative that, and again, we're going to see failure rates on those new shows too. Don't get me wrong, but I think as a community, there's lots of there's a Facebook group, there's Google Plus, there's lots of places where podcasters can get help and act as a support community and help these shows, which really did not exist before. It was all very segmented and people were really out there on their own. But I do like it now that there is a lot more resources, I guess, for a better word, for new content creators. And who knows, like you said, some of these new guys coming on may have the next the next big show, and I hope they do. I think the space needs more, as I call them, 10%ers. There's definitely a lot of folks that are still struggling, so hopefully that those shows will continue to grow as well.
Yeah, I want to make one more pitch.
There's also a lot of new companies and new platforms that are coming into the space that are going to surprise some people, I think, and a lot of it's centered around the car.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of new companies that we're going to see in 2015. I really think that 2015 is going to be a much bigger year for podcasting than 2014. I think doubt.
So. And I want to make one pitch. I do a show, actually. I should have mentioned before, but I break all the rules because we're very inconsistent. It's been a very busy year for me this year and for my co-host. So we have been very inconsistent, but it's called Jenny and Paul Sell Out. It's just two people talking. It's, that kind of show, but we enjoy it. It's at selloutpodcast.com. And we say it's all about getting your stuff together, so to speak. Yeah, cool. So we have a couple episodes that are in the can ready to come out. So
I like some of your cover art. It makes you go, what's this about?
Yeah, exactly.
It's about it's about embracing life and getting your stuff together.
Sellout podcast. I could have used that about 9.5 years ago when I was barraged with emails for writing a book on podcasting. Oh, you're a sellout. You're a sellout. And then,
exactly.
And then thousands more when I took an advertiser. Oh, you're a sellout. It's perfect. I love that. If you ever want to get rid of that domain, let me know.
We're ready to sell
Todd,
out
are you selling?
anytime.
Are you still selling copies of that book? Is it still on Amazon?
I still get a royalty check. It still sells, but please, people, it's really dated. There's a lot.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Really dated.
Yeah, really dated. There wasn't even iTunes when it was written, so there's nothing in there about iTunes. I get that question. How come you didn't write about iTunes? I'm like, it didn't exist from a podcast perspective in May of 2005.
Yeah, because Todd, that was the first podcasting book that was ever written.
Yeah, sold to date about 50,000 copies, so it did real well for a tech geeky book.
Yeah, exactly. It was pretty geeky, that's for sure. I've got a copy of it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any more paper copies. I think there's only digital now, but I got a box of them somewhere in the attic. Well, Paul, thanks for being on, and it's been fun, and we'll have to have you back. Great perspectives, and good luck to the team over there at Midroll. And you definitely want to go over, and your Spodcasters, look at the opportunities at midroll.com. Whoops, wrong screen. And of course, check out Paul's other site at radiosurvivor.com on what they're doing over there, and follow the radio space. It's good to keep abreast of everything going on because there's a lot of tidbits of information being leaked here and there, and I think it's good to stay abreast of all the news cycle.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Todd and Rob, for inviting me. This was a lot of fun.
All right.
Yeah.
And have a great weekend, and it's a little after New Year, but Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thanks, Paul. It was great to have you on. Yeah.
Bye.
So, Rob, big week.
Yes. Interesting week.
We, for those of you that don't know, Podcast Award nominations open on Monday.
The 19th. Right?
Yeah, I was going to go look at the site and see if they've updated it. I know they have control. I know they're working it. I don't know if they're doing anything on the Twitter feed. There's some information up, but it just still doesn't show when they're going to start. But the date is the 19th. We'll see how that goes in its launch. So they were a little bit slow on getting ready, but I think they're kind of getting caught up now. I do have information from Rick. I don't know if I should. Let me read this and make sure. Can I announce this on the show? All right. We'll announce nominations. Norma's a big fan.
Well, the 10th annual Podcast Award show is going to be at the New Media Expo as part of NAB.
Right.
At the Westgate Resort and Casino on April 14th. So that's the day. I don't think there's a time yet, but I'm assuming it's in the evening sometime.
Rick says, I was going to say we could hold the news of X and X until next weekend if you and Rob wanted to break it on the show. I guess that gives me permission, yeah?
It kind of sounds like it.
So here's the deal. The host of the Podcast Awards, and Rick, if I'm not supposed to say this, I'm sorry. It's Dennis Miller and Sex with Emily Morse. So yes. Dennis Miller, that's going to be huge.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's a good team. It's going to be interesting.
It's going to be fun. Dennis Miller and Emily Morse. So wow. That's a great combination. If nothing else, it's going to draw people to come in and have fun. I don't know if you watch Dennis Miller at all, and he sometimes he's on Bill O'Reilly and a variety of other ones, but the guy is a riot.
Yeah, well, he's a comedian at his roots, right?
Yeah. So he has this interesting spin on the news and everything else going on in the world, and he kind of calls it as he sees it, and it's a lot of fun. Now, I haven't followed any of Emily's content before. What's the background on her?
Well, she's been podcasting her Sex with Emily show since about, I believe she started in like 2008 or 7, something like that. She's a long-time podcaster and has built a huge audience. She's actually spent a lot of time on the Loveline radio show and podcast as well. She's been a regular contributor to that show for many, many years. So, it's, she talks about our relationships and things like that. And has been, she's a kind of a Podcast One person as well as Dennis Miller. I mean, he's got a nationally syndicated radio show that he does, but he also has a podcast. It's about a 15-minute daily podcast that he does. So I think it'll be in it. I think it's a good combination. She's a real spark plug, and she's funny and she's entertaining and she talks real fast. So you got to kind of get used to that. But I think it'll be. I think that it's a great team.
And I do want to acknowledge, I think New Media Expo had worked with the team at Podcast One to book both Dennis and Emily. So kudos out to the Podcast One team for doing that. Of course, as you guys know, I'm only a consultant. I'm not involved with running the podcast awards, so don't send me your emails.
Yeah,
but
I have nothing to do with it either.
So it should be an exciting year. Now, speaking of which, Rob, you've had a little bit of change in, how should we say, perspective, or what's the what's your status now at Podcast One? I know you're not there full time, but what's the?
Yeah, I basically have stepped down as the CTO of Podcast One. There's a new person over there that I'm really excited about, and his name is Chris Smith. He's a longtime podcast producer. I mean, I actually met Chris at the first Podcast Expo back in 2005. I mean, he was there, and he has a podcast called Croncast, and built a lot of technology through his Pale Grove Studios company that he has back on the East Coast. And so been working with Chris over the last couple months to get him on board as the CTO of Podcast One, and that was announced just a week or so ago. And so, but I'm still working for Podcast One. I'm still an employee of the company, and have a little bit of a different role. I'm more of a consultant now. So I am out there kind of looking for potentially my next project. So I'm really kind of doing more consulting right now, but also working daily with Chris and the team over there to help facilitate the next big platform for Podcast One and what they're trying to accomplish there, which is a huge project. There's no question. But also working, I'm reaching out to a lot of other companies, trying to see if I can have an impact in a much bigger way, in a broader way as well. Working with other platforms and other networks and other players in the space to evangelize and to help bring some 10 years of podcast knowledge to help a bunch of new people that are coming into the space. This is a real, like we talked about earlier, this is a really hot time for podcasting. There's a lot of new people coming into the space that think that they can have an impact coming from the radio side as well as content side. And there's just a lot of people that just don't know how to do it and don't know what the right thing to do at scale. And I think it's a great trend, and I'm really excited about kind of this next phase of what I'm working on. And we shall see.
Well, one thing for sure is you're not having to fly back and forth every week now. So
correct. I'm back up in Seattle now. I'm not having to do that 3-day in LA and then back to Seattle every week. I did that for almost a year. So that got a little tiring to do that. It was almost like having two separate lives.
Right. Now, one thing. I know you're talking with a lot of different parties, and you're probably not at liberty to really talk too much about those discussions. But what's the vibe you're hearing as you're talking with various groups?
Oh, I think just a lot of perception of opportunity, and it's like
that's an interesting word. You said perception of opportunity.
Yeah, I think it's following in the, and you can probably sense a little bit of skepticism somewhat, just based on how many times we've seen this happen over the years. And I also kind of tell people this too. I say, we're in the post-serial era right now, right? So is it real, right?
Right.
What happened with serial, or is it just a perception thing? Because we've seen this happen probably a good 3 times now, where we had this bump in interest because there was some bunch of press coverage, and it created new listeners and those kind of things. But without that press coverage, is it going to create a drop in interest for some period of time? And what's the next big content that's going to drive serial level attention again? I think that's a big question for the industry is how do we keep this momentum going forward as we move into 2015, 2016. And I think that's an important question. But I also see a lot of new companies coming into the space. So I think just that happening will create a continued perception of expansion, and hopefully that leads to actual expansion and more revenue coming in. I think that there's more income and revenue coming in from advertising than ever before now. So I think those are all momentum trends. And it's capturing, and what's happening with the car, with podcasting and on-demand audio being important in the car, I think is another significant trend that's going to continue the momentum of this space. I just think it's time for on-demand audio to get its time in the sun. And it was video, and prior to that, and to some extent right in the same time with social media. I just think it's time for audio, and it was a little delayed, but I think it's happening.
With all these new companies coming in, isn't there going to be a battle for talent? Because
it's all about content.
Yeah, because there are so and I was being generous when I said 10% of podcasters have these huge audiences. There's only so many podcasters that have volume, and I'm never worried about the number, and that's one thing that I've done different. That's why we have 35,000 podcasters that we work with. Is I'm never worried about volume. I don't care what the show size and audience size is. I just want to know what that number is. But these new players coming in, they're definitely going to have their eyeballs set on the goal line of having big talent names to drive big numbers. I don't know. Do you think any of these players are going to want to come in and work with the average content creator that's out there? The guy that's got a little podcast studio in the corner of his bedroom or in his office, and is reaching 2,000-3,000 people a week. Do you think those companies are even giving consideration to those types of content creators?
I would say at this point that the honest answer to that is that I believe that the phase that we're coming into now is and has been going on for a while now is a focused on big shows and big. So as you think about radio, right, there's big stars, big nationally syndicated kind of celebrity stars on syndicated radio. I believe that that's the focus of this next phase is serial level shows, the big hits, right? And it's going to take big talent. It's going to take bigger budgets. It's going to take all those kinds of things to create that next big wave that's going to reach. It'd be great to have a podcast that reached 10 million listeners, right?
Right.
None exists today.
None.
But it's surely possible, right?
Yeah, it is. If you have 140 shows and you're in a network like we do.
Yeah, no, I mean, exactly. So I think a lot of the new investment coming into the space is focused on big shows. And I think Serial is just a reflection of that. Sure, Serial probably hit a 5 million over the total downloads over the whole series or something like that. But I'm talking about scale that's much higher than even Serial did. Is where I think that the focus is coming in on. That doesn't preclude opportunity for individual independent podcasters to still find audience and to break out. But it is a game of scale, especially if you want to be advertiser supported. And if there's brand advertisers coming into the space, direct response advertisers that are willing to put more money into this space, if they can get greater scale, then there's an incentive for content producers to invest in bigger scale productions and bigger distribution.
Well, I think you and I both know that because you're popular on TV, because you're popular on radio, does not translate to a content creator being able to connect with an audience.
I agree 150% with that. Yeah.
So the model...
It's not a slam dunk, that's for sure.
It's not a slam dunk. Now, they definitely have their cards. They got their marketing teams. They got their production teams. They got all this stuff going for them. So if the shows fail, it is purely on the talent side for way the failure happened.
Yeah, it's also I could also fail based on a particular distribution strategy as well.
That's true too.
Yeah.
If they don't want to be in iTunes, or if they don't want to be in Stitcher, and they don't want to be on Blueberry, and they don't want to be on the variety of other sites, they they got to go where the audience is, and if they're not willing to do so, force the audience to come to them. That's not how these audiences work.
But if you do back up and you look at the big picture of media just in general up to this point, and I don't know that necessarily that will be entirely the case going forward, but I mean, just think of YouTube, or think of Hulu, or you think of Netflix, or whatever, and to some extent there is a game to be played for exclusive platform-specific content as a way to drive value, to either generate revenue for a particular aggregator network, or to create loyal users, right? So I think exclusive content does have a place somewhat in this scheme of things as scale grows. But generally, I would say if you want to scale an advertising business in the podcasting space, you got to be everywhere. But the problem is it depends on what your business model is. A lot of places are trying to generate revenue off of your content and not sharing that revenue. And I've talked about that in my Podango articles too, is that we're also coming into a time which is a little bit more reflective of traditional.
You mean Pottertainment articles?
Pottertainment, sorry.
Yeah.
That there is going to be a conflict between content and distribution around revenue, because distribution needs to earn revenue to keep distribution alive. But currently, there's no way for distribution to monetize right now.
Well, there are solutions for that.
Yes, there are. Yes, it can be done.
It can.
Yes.
I really, my roots are largely with independent content creators. That's where I'm at, and I think it's going to be good for all, because as the mainstream talent comes in, everyone's going to, the ship's going to rise together. I don't know if that exact metaphor is appropriate, but we're all going to
benefit from it, right?
Yeah, benefit from it. But it'll be curious to see what's going to happen this year. I know that I'm excited about it. Based on the phone calls we've had right off the beginning of the year, we just had a major 3 days of discussions with a company that we're really excited about with what they're going to be doing, and matter of fact, we're going to probably be putting some priority to getting them up and rolling. But once they make their announcements, it's not going to be, they'll be like, oh yeah, that made sense. Why weren't they in the space before? So there are a lot of media groups that are now looking at podcasting where they may have been video focused before. They're starting to realize there is a market for their content on the audio side. So that's what I see. So
you say media groups, what are you specifically referring to? Are you referring to content groups that are primarily doing like YouTube stuff? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or maybe I have to be careful here. So yeah. So basically it's a group that's doing doing media, video media primarily.
Gotcha.
So I think that they've started to realize, and some of them are going to go slow. They're going to experiment and see what works and what doesn't. But when I'm getting calls like that from those types of groups, that it makes me very, very, very excited. And it's also the podcasting space from a content creator's perspective is changing too, and we're getting a lot of new folks in. We need to make sure we help them as much as we can get off the ground and get running. So, kind of alluded to that earlier, but
hey. Can we talk about your podcast templates for WordPress? Is that something that you can talk about?
We can talk about it. Let me load up my site. So when we released PowerPress 6, we included for a better word, the ability for a podcaster to create a subscribe page. So if you look at my site, if you come to my site, if you're listening, come to geeknewscentral.com. right at the very top right of the page, there's a big, bold subscribe to podcast with 3 graphics that we
Yep.
made the size that they are so that they can be touched in a mobile device. They meet the specs to basically just you just touch it with your finger and it'll load. So we got the standard iTunes link, and then we have an RSS feed, but we also have a box that says more subscription options. And when you click on that, what that does is that's going to load. And what we've done is we auto generate this page for podcasters. If they don't have a subscribe page, we auto create it. And it's a template that they can go in and edit. They're not locked into using our template, but we put the basic information in there that's the same on every site, and basically says by subscribing to this podcast, you'll automatically receive the latest episode downloaded to your computer or portable device. Select the subscription method below that best fits your style. So again, we have iTunes, RSS feed, and then we chose 2 Android apps, Beyond Pod for Android and Podcast Republic for Android, for 2 reasons. One, both those apps are free. 2, they don't shove a lot of advertising at you. They do have a little bit, but not a lot. Now, I believe Beyond Pod has a paid version as well, but they also support what I call 2-click subscription. So once the app is loaded, you can click on an RSS feed on a website. It'll ask you in Android, do you want to load the browser or do you want to load the app? You choose the app, and it auto subscribes that way. But so it's really kind of a 2-step process, but it's a lot better than way it was before.
So why would you not have like Stitcher on that list, or is there? Yeah, I know it's over on the far right.
Yeah, that's another widget that I have. Why didn't we have Stitcher? We wanted to be able to give people a generic podcast app that they could use. Not everyone's on Stitcher.
Yeah.
So we just didn't include it.
Okay.
And then I have the same box for a video. Now, it's going to be a little different for most podcasters. You won't have 2 boxes. You only have 1. But below that, we've got information on, of course, my screen is real small here, and my Facebook and Twitter promotion sidebars are in the way. But we have a ability here to do, we can say, okay, we give instructions on iOS, Mac, Windows, Android, and Amazon Fire. We give links to the Play Store to go to the apps to get them. And also talk about how you can use your favorite application. We also worked with Apple, and I've got them doubled up here, but we basically have the ability now to Apple has a widget that they will pre-build for you. You can see some examples here of it that basically, if you click on this, will load the iTunes App Store. But this is actually this little box here, that for those of you that are watching, is actually created by Apple. That's not our code, that's theirs, and it's something that you can place on your website any place. There's a short code you can use to drop that on a right-hand column of your website if you so choose.
So you click on that and it takes you to the iTunes software?
So if I click on it, it takes me to the iTunes
website.
Yeah, it takes me to the website. But then I would be able to say view in iTunes. It would launch iTunes, and I could subscribe there. So it's not necessary. But if you're on a mobile device, it'll load the podcast app.
Yeah. Okay.
So, and then I just have a player. I have our new
it's like a
playlist player. That's just, and I put that in there myself. That isn't included in the default page build. But everything typically from bookmark this podcast and up, from this area up, is included in the subscribe page. But really what we've done is we've given people the ability to, boom, just make a subscribe page and not have to think about it. If they want to leave it default, they can, and they're done. It takes 15 seconds in PowerPress to do it. Now, if you've already got a subscribe page, it basically gives you some options on what to name it. We don't overwrite a page that you already have.
So that will actually generate a page inside of any other kind of graphic template that you install in WordPress, right?
Well, what it does is if they don't have a subscribe page, we specifically create if you go into WordPress, and let me go in here.
But Do you have to install a template, or it's built
No,
into
it's
the
built in.
PowerPress?
Yeah, PowerPress
software?
creates the
Okay,
template. Yeah.
gotcha.
So if I go to my pages,
But I thought that you were working on a complete podcast template, or you were trying to find one, or you were trying to put one
oh,
together.
that's coming as far as the website goes. Website,
Yeah,
yeah, those are.
exactly.
And in matter of fact, we've been working with some of the guys that are actually creating templates
Yeah,
to make them better. And unfortunately, most of those are paid.
yeah,
Um,
that's fine.
yeah, paid ones. So let me go to the subscribe page and just show people what it looks like.
So are you also doing that with a multi-site deployment,
Yeah,
kind of like what you did?
yeah. This is a
Okay.
multi-site deployment here. So it basically just that's the HTML. I don't have the what you see is what you get, but you can go in and edit what's on that page. But we just dropped this stuff in here automatically. That was we
Hmm.
basically created
Yep.
that. Whoops, I'm on the wrong page. We just dropped this in there for them to make it easy. Now, so far as the actual template goes, Rob, that's
Full, we're
full
talking about a full UI template.
right.
But,
The full UI template's coming, but
okay.
again, I would rather, to be honest with you, there's 25 ways to make a template, and I would rather have two or three great template creators make templates, and then we just recommend them. I don't want to be
Yeah.
in the template business per se. Joey Kisme and those guys have done a great job. App Identity theme is a good one. It's built on the Genesis platform.
Could you pull that up on the screen?
Yeah.
App Identity? Is that
Yeah,
what
and
you
I
said?
just he's cringing if he's watching.
Oh, is he? Okay.
Yeah, Appendipity. So excuse me.
Appendipity?
Yeah, Appendipity. So he's got on his site 4 or 5, I think maybe 6 really good. Okay, let me load the themes. They've got a number of themes, and you can buy the whole package or you can buy one-offs. But here's the kicker on this particular theme set. If you're a WordPress user, you have to buy the Genesis package, which is like I think $100. Then you buy the Appendipity child theme to sit on top of Genesis. And I know we probably just made a whole bunch of people's brain explode, but it's right up there on the top. Says get the Genesis framework, and basically what Genesis has done and what devs are doing, it's making it a lot easier for content creators that don't have any theme skills to get some easy to manage themes, for a better word. So they charge for their themes, and they've got stuff for SoundCloud. They've got a playlist player. They've got Soundcast. They've got a variety of different themes. I was working with them. As a matter of fact, we ran out of time before we went to Vegas, but I was going to convert TPN.TV to a Appendipity theme that they actually did some work on. I feel bad because we weren't able to get it implemented, but I didn't, the last day, I didn't have time to deal with a website change.
Yeah.
And but ultimately, probably TPN.TV, where we have all our content from CS, will probably be switching over to one of their themes. And but there's other folks that are making podcast themes out there too. So I would rather people someone else focus on creating themes. But one thing that we're finding, theme creators are not podcasters.
Correct. So
So
somebody needs to hold their hand a little bit. Is that what you're
well,
saying?
or give constructive feedback. And it's like software design. Everyone has their style, and it's it's hard to you say, okay, that I get nitpicky. Well, that header's too big, and and it can get really ugly really fast. So um, I picture on my side of Geek News Central, what I end up doing, and what has really worked out for me was I installed the Genesis theme,
Hmm.
and then I used the standard Genesis child theme. And this is not perfect. I'm still a work in progress here to do what I wanted to do, to be able to create what I wanted to create. Now, if you come to my site and then you come over to the new media show, the colors change a little bit. But the what's going on here? Did I click on that? Oh, there it goes. It's
Yeah.
loading slow. Then the the new media show branding looks almost the same. There is some, it essentially what it has done is give some consistencies across the brand and the shows that are, we work together with. So, but again, Brian, my creative guy, he's kind of like, ugh, I want to change this and change that, and change this, and ultimately we'll get to that. But there's a lot of bigger fish to fry at this point.
So the site that's currently being used for the new media show is built on the Appendipity Genesis framework?
It's built on Genesis, the Genesis framework only, and the Genesis child theme.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So if I wanted to run the Appendipity theme, I would have to upload it and change to that and do the changes. But they really focused a lot on SoundCloud implementation. They really they did make some themes that were podcast host agnostic, which helped. But their initial focus was some of those cookie cutter hosting platforms. But
hey, I heard, speaking of SoundCloud, I heard a little bird over the last couple days tell me that SoundCloud's podcasting beta program is moving out of beta here soon.
So is that good or bad?
Don't know on that front. I just know that they're moving out of calling it a beta program, which usually means that it's baked now.
Wow.
It's not finished, but it's at a point where they feel like it's good enough.
Good enough for whatever they're going to do it.
To take it out of beta.
Well, one thing that they hope they fix their RSS stuff. They got broke RSS still right now. So
yeah. So there's still improvements that platform needs to make, but just keep in mind, as we look at SoundCloud, they are focused on their platform.
Right.
They are doing podcasting as a service to the people that publish to their platform, but they primarily are a streaming company, and they're primarily want to promote their platform. So podcasting is a service that they're providing, but it's not their primary focus. But I believe that things are getting better over there.
Well, I still have my own concerns on a couple of other levels, but I'll leave those comments for later. But it's if they don't get a buyer soon, it's or another round. It's just interesting. You have to watch what happens there. But I haven't heard any other rumors. I'm out of the rumor business at this point. But there is some folks that are really, I guess for a better word, lighting the podcasting space on fire with some discussions. And actually, I've got an interview I'm supposed to do I'm actually supposed to be doing an interview right now, Rob. So we're gonna have to get off in here. And thanks for hanging out with us. We're long anyway. We're an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
But folks, you can reach Rob or I at Todd or Rob at newmediashow.com. And we'll be back here next Saturday with an event. I will give you some update on my travel schedule, Rob, so you know when I'm going to be out. There will be a couple things that coming down the line, but I'll give you that details in an email. Okay. And but everyone else, thanks for being here. Any idea next Saturday who we've got?
There's a few people that are on the fence right now, so I will let you know. I can't really announce anybody right now.
Okay. But again, if you're going to New Media Expo, you need to get your tickets now, get your hotels booked, get your airlines, come and join us. We're going to have a great time that week, and it's fast approaching. So make your plans, get your vacation time set in, and come out for the show and geek out and get connected with the podcasters at New Media Expo at nmxevents.com. I want to thank the NMX team over there too and all that they're doing. So we'll have more news on them in coming shows.
Yes.
But from now, we're out of here. Everyone take care. Thanks for being here.
Take care, everybody.
Aloha.
Bye.